Right now, you are looking at a geographic trap hidden inside the United States, a mega region so brutal, it slowly kills almost everything that enters its borders. This is Great Basin, America's most inhospitable frontier. Welcome back to GeoAtlas. When we look at the map of North America, we see a land of bustling cities and endless highways. But tucked away in the American West lies a massive, silent vacuum that operates on an entirely different set of rules. The Great Basin is a land of sheer extremes, shaped over millions of years by a series of fascinating and violent geographic processes. This mega region stands among the most unique, surreal places on Earth. Yet, beneath its haunting beauty lies a dark reality. Despite modern technology, the Great Basin holds a global reputation for being one of the most challenging, dangerous, and actively inhospitable regions in the world, a place that actively resists human settlement. So, what hidden mechanics make this specific region so incredibly dangerous? To find out, we have to look past the tourist maps and dive into a landscape that refuses to let anything escape. To understand the deadly nature of this region, we have to look at its hidden plumbing. The Great Basin is a massive endorheic basin, a word that essentially means it functions as a geographic dead end. Any water that enters this region is completely trapped, physically unable to escape or flow into the nearby Pacific Ocean. Instead, the region's water is forced into a hopeless loop. It either evaporates back into the punishing atmosphere, sinks beneath the permeable soil, and rock into deep underground layers called aquifers, or flows in an endless, futile cycle between isolated rivers and drying lakes. Because of this brutal, cyclical nature, the Great Basin operates as its own self-contained world. And this self-contained world is monstrously huge. Sprawling across a massive portion of the American West, it covers a total size of 209,000 square miles. To put that into perspective, that makes the Great Basin almost the exact same size as the entire country of France. If you look at a political map, this geographic vacuum swallows just about all of Nevada, the western half of Utah, a large southeastern portion of California, and even bleeds into small pockets of Oregon and Baja California in Mexico. This makes it by far the largest drainage basin in North America that completely lacks an outflow of water. In fact, the Great Basin is so colossally vast that it isn't actually a single basin at all. Instead, it is a complex mega-region stitched together by hundreds of smaller individual basins. So, how did a geographic prison of this magnitude manage to form in the first place? The answer is written in the violent movements of the Earth's tectonic plates, specifically the North American plate and the Pacific plate. Right beneath the soil, these two tectonic titans are actively ripping away from each other. The Pacific plate is drifting toward the northwest, while the North American plate moves in a general west-southwest direction. This colossal pulling apart of the continent creates what geologists call a basin and range topography, a unique and punishing landscape where a series of high, jagged ridges is immediately followed by low, flat valleys. Over millions of years, these crustal movements have formed incredibly dense mountain ranges. Today, this entire hydrographic prison is locked between two of the most massive mountain barriers on the continent, the Sierra Nevada Range to the absolute west and the towering Rocky Mountains to the east. To the north sits a smaller bottleneck known as the Snake River Basin. Together, these boundaries give the Great Basin a terrifyingly distinct border called the Great Basin Divide, an invisible line that acts as a localized version of the Continental Divide. These fortress-like mountain ranges have a devastating effect on the weather inside the prison. The massive Sierra Nevada mountain range acts as a colossal barrier, casting a brutal rain shadow over the entire region. Because of the extreme height and range of these mountains, the moisture-rich clouds rolling in from the Pacific Ocean are violently stripped of their water before they can cross the peaks. This completely deprives the Great Basin of life-giving rainfall, forcing the creation of several hyper-arid deserts across the interior. Right at the scorching edge of the Great Basin, sitting directly beside the Sierra Nevada range, is the infamous Mojave Desert. Because it sits directly in the deepest pocket of the rain shadow, the Mojave is classified as a hot desert, defined by blistering temperatures, baking sun, and virtually no vegetation. But the true king of this region is the Great Basin Desert itself, the largest desert in the entire United States. This massive expanse of hostile terrain constitutes about 2/3 of the total area of the Great Basin. While scientists still fiercely debate its exact boundaries and size, the violent basin and range topography is on full display here. More than 30 mountain peaks punch through this arid wilderness, with some of the summits reaching a staggering height of over 10,000 feet. Unlike the Mojave, the Great Basin Desert features a colder, more moderate climate, but it is no less dangerous. The low-lying valleys act as heat traps, receiving a severely limited amount of rainfall. Up among the elevated mountain peaks, temperatures plummet and rainfall is considerably higher. This scarce precipitation trickles down the rocky mountainsides into the flat, baking valleys below, resetting the endless endorheic cycle. Once the rain hits the valley floor, the water faces a chaotic maze of dead ends. It might empty into any of the Great Basin's desperate river systems, such as the Bear River, which winds across a grueling 350 miles before dumping its contents into the Great Salt Lake in Utah. This terminal basin is the single largest saltwater lake in the entire Western Hemisphere. However, this title is highly volatile. The Great Salt Lake is a seasonal body of water, meaning a massive portion of the lake routinely dries up and vanishes due to the intense, evaporating heat of the region. Alternatively, the water might rush into the Humboldt Basin, an area surrounding the vital Humboldt River. This river completely dominates the Great Basin Desert, cutting across the map from the west outside of Reno all the way to the east past Salt Lake City. Due to its highly erratic, meandering paths, the Humboldt River is widely considered the longest river in the entire mega-region, though its twisting nature makes an exact measurement nearly impossible to calculate. When you add up all these extreme attributes, from the scorching valley floors and unnavigable mountain ranges to the vanishing lakes and total isolation, it becomes glaringly obvious why the Great Basin is one of the most hostile places on Earth for human settlement. Unsurprisingly, this massive chunk of America has remained largely uninhabited for centuries. But humans are resilient, and to understand the true danger of this region, we have to look at the history of those who were actually brave enough to face these extreme conditions. If there is one absolute law written into the rugged topography of the American West, it is this: life cannot exist without water, and nowhere on the continent is this brutal truth more apparent than inside the perimeter of the Great Basin. Throughout human history, the unforgiving, inhospitable conditions of this region have forced anyone brave enough to enter to map their entire existence around a single variable: the immediate availability of drinking water. The earliest human footprints inside the Great Basin were pressed into the dirt roughly 10,000 years BCE by the Paleo-Indian people. These were the ancient nomadic hunters who had initially crossed into the Americas via the icy land bridge across the Bering Strait, navigating between modern-day Russia and Alaska. Slowly, over generations, these small groups migrated down the Pacific coast of North America before finally pushing inland and encountering the harsh realities of the Great Basin. Among these early groups was a distinct, highly resilient faction known to modern archaeologists as the Folsom culture. Operating as nomadic hunter-gatherers, they trailed megafauna across the Great Basin, adapting dynamically to a landscape that offered absolutely no margin for error. Over thousands of years, as the megafauna dwindled, these native populations gradually shifted away from their entirely nomadic lifestyles, anchoring themselves instead to specific, resource-rich pockets of the basin. One of the most vital sanctuaries for these early settlements was the sprawling basin of Lake Lahontan. During this era, Lake Lahontan was a massive endorheic lake dominating what is now northwestern Nevada. Sprawling across a staggering 8,500 square miles, it was one of the largest freshwater bodies in North America, acting as a permanent life support system for native communities and offering a lush refuge from the surrounding desert heat. But geography is never static. As the global climate shifted and warmed, this massive inland sea began a slow, agonizing retreat, evaporating into thin air until it completely vanished roughly 9,000 years ago. Today, only tiny, fragmented ghosts of Lake Lahontan survive in the arid landscape, preserved as the much smaller Pyramid Lake and Walker Lake. With their primary oasis gone, indigenous tribes, including the Ute, Mono, and Goshute peoples, were forced to scatter, venturing deeper into the unforgiving mountain ranges and baking valleys in search of any microclimate capable of sustaining life. Over time, the cultural footprint of these tribes expanded well beyond the strict hydrographic borders of the Great Basin, bleeding into what are now parts of New Mexico, Arizona, Wyoming, and Idaho. This vast, interconnected network of survival strategies is collectively classified by historians as the Great Basin Culture Area. For millennia, this delicate balance between humans and the arid earth endured. But as history has shown us time and again, it was only a matter of time before European empires cast their eyes toward the blank spaces on their maps. The first documented European contact with this isolated world occurred in 1765, when the Spanish explorer Juan María Antonio Rivera pushed north and breached the perimeter of the Great Basin. Throughout the late 1700s and early 1800s, a slow trickle of non-native fur trappers and explorers began filtering into the region. Despite fierce indigenous resistance and bitter territorial disputes, the United States eventually consolidated its grip on the Great Basin and its surrounding territories through a rapid-fire series of aggressive geopolitical maneuvers and international treaties. This grand territorial heist was achieved via the Spanish Cession of 1819, the Oregon Treaty of 1846, and finally, the Mexican Cession of 1848. It was precisely during this chaotic era of expansion that the region finally received its modern name. U.S. Army Major General John C. Fremont thoroughly mapped the territory and definitively noted that because the waters here had no outlet to the sea, it was in the most literal hydrographic sense, a Great Basin. Armed with Fremont's maps, the first massive wave of non-indigenous migration hit the basin floor. In 1847, a large group of Mormon pioneers marched into the arid valley of the Great Salt Lake, establishing the foundations of Salt Lake City. Seeking geographic isolation to practice their faith, these settlers immediately found themselves locked in a series of violent skirmishes and bloody resource wars with the native Ute people, who were systematically pushed off their ancestral watering holes. Then, just 1 year later, in 1848, the geopolitical landscape of the West was completely upended by the discovery of gold in California. Suddenly, a chaotic flood of over 100,000 prospectors began racing across the continent, chasing a desperate dream of instant wealth. But to reach the goldfields of California, they first had to survive the ultimate geographic gauntlet, crossing the Great Basin. Faced with a lethal expanse of sand and rock, early wagon trains carved out the grueling 1,600-mile California Trail. To keep their livestock alive, the trail was forced to hug the meandering path of the Humboldt River, turning this lone, muddy waterway into a crowded highway of human desperation. Pioneers had to navigate their way through suffocating alkali flats and hoist their heavy wagons over perilous mountain passes just to escape the basin alive. However, it didn't take long for the migration to reverse. Pioneers soon realized that the riches weren't just waiting in California. The Great Basin itself was sitting on a fortune. In 1859, prospectors struck an unimaginably dense vein of silver ore deep inside the Virginia range of Nevada. This was the Comstock Lode, the first major silver discovery in United States history. Almost overnight, the frontier settlement of Virginia City exploded into a bustling, chaotic metropolis, with its population swelling to a staggering 25,000 residents by the 1870s. Nevada became so fundamentally synonymous with this underground wealth that it permanently earned its iconic nickname, the Silver State. Yet, the boom and bust cycle of the West is absolute. As the silver veins were aggressively mined to near extinction and the underground wealth began to dwindle, the boom towns collapsed just as quickly as they had risen. Stripped of their economic lifelines, thousands of miners and families abandoned the region, migrating further west toward the coast of California. They weren't just searching for new minerals to extract. They were actively fleeing the oppressive, exhausting heat and the unkind, isolated conditions of the Great Basin, yearning instead for the cool, temperate climate of the Pacific shore. With the silver rush over, the Great Basin quietly reverted to what it had always been, a brutal, silent void that people largely just tried to survive and pass through on their way to somewhere else. The vast landscape was left to a scattering of resilient Native American communities, devout Mormon farmers, and a lonely network of hardened ranchers and miners who were uniquely willing to endure the grueling, isolated lifestyle dictated by the terrain. But this raises a critical question. Today, we live in an era of massive concrete dams, air conditioning, and superhighways. With all the terrifying progress of modern technology, has the Great Basin actually become any more human-friendly than it was in the past? To find out, we have to look at the modern footprint of this geographic prison. In the modern day, human civilization has managed to carve out only two major metropolitan anchors within the brutal interior of the Great Basin. First, sitting right on the western fortress edge of the basin, is Reno, Nevada, holding a population of about 490,000 people in its metro area. On the opposite side, nestled against the mountains in Utah, lies Salt Lake City, the region's other major urban hub, with a population of about 1.3 million people. trying to calculate the population of the Great Basin overall is an incredibly difficult logistical challenge, primarily because this geographic vacuum completely ignores arbitrary county or state borders. However, current estimates place the total population somewhere between 8 and 10 million people across the entire mega region. When you factor in the colossal, country-sized landmass we are dealing with, these numbers reveal a stark reality. The Great Basin remains one of the most sparsely populated and isolated regions in the entire United States. Within its boundaries, over half of the population is crowded tightly inside these few metro and urban areas, a urban concentration rate that is steadily increasing. When you step outside these two city centers, the true nature of the landscape becomes clear. The overwhelming majority of people still actively opt not to face the brutal, daily conditions of the Great Basin. As a result, the vast layout of this land remains completely devoid of human life, a silent expanse of desert and stone. Yet, even with the modern shift toward protective urban living, the residents of the Great Basin cannot escape their geography. The region is currently locked in a desperate battle against severe chronic water shortages. To combat this existential threat, the region's entire survival apparatus runs on an incredibly intricate, artificial system of man-made reservoirs and heavy irrigation networks. In fact, a staggering 70% of all the water used in Nevada and Utah is manually appropriated and diverted from this fragile infrastructure. One of the most critical lifelines in this network is the modern Lake Lahontan Reservoir, a body of water artificially formed by the Bureau of Reclamation back in 1905 through the strategic construction of a massive dam. To keep this synthetic world alive, water must be aggressively harvested from every available natural cycle. It is collected in the form of heavy snowfall high in the mountains during the winter and caught as rainfall during the fleeting spring. Deep beneath the desert floor, the ancient underground aquifers are aggressively tapped, and their finite water supply is manually extracted using massive industrial pumps. This hard-won water is then transported across hundreds of miles of hostile terrain, flowing directly into urban homes for drinking water and out to commercial farms for agricultural survival. Modern life in the Great Basin is not organic. It is a landscape entirely dependent on advanced scientific and technological achievements just to survive another day. To this day, a large percentage of those who actually live out in the punishing, rural areas of the Great Basin are indigenous populations. There are 30,000 Native Americans living within the state of Nevada alone. Over the past century, the federal government has established multiple reservations for these indigenous peoples, including the Ely Shoshone Reservation founded in 1930 and the Duckwater Reservation established in 1940. However, because of the uncompromising geography, Native communities today suffer disproportionately from a number of severe social issues, most notably systemic poverty and rampant unemployment. This hardship is a direct consequence of their extreme physical isolation. These reservations are tucked away in the most remote corners of the Great Basin, largely lacking the vital infrastructure required to connect them to major economic hubs or supply lines. As a direct result of this physical remoteness, the native people of the Great Basin are frequently forced to confront extreme water scarcities. Even worse, they routinely encounter dangerous issues with their local water supplies becoming heavily contaminated with toxic materials. This environmental poisoning stems directly from the aggressive mining of minerals within the hills. Yet, despite the toxic cost, mining remains the undisputed cornerstone of the region's economy. Beside the historic extraction of silver, a new, hyper-valuable element has begun to be violently pulled from the dry earth of the Great Basin: lithium. This is the critical material that powers the modern world, found in everything from our computers and smartphones to electric vehicles and home energy storage systems. Beyond mining, ranching acts as another key economic sector, with the majority of cattle ranching being tightly concentrated along the banks of the Humboldt River, where the soil is naturally more fertile. But when you zoom out, these industrial operations look tiny compared to the sheer vastness of the empty land. Because of this, leaders have begun pivoting the economy, putting a much heavier emphasis on tourism to exploit the hauntingly beautiful and diverse scenery of the region. Up in the towering mountains surrounding Salt Lake City, world-class skiing has turned into a massive, popular pastime. Out on the desert floor, thousands of travelers journey across the world to witness the impressive, blinding salt flats located just west of the Great Salt Lake. And, of course, the remote, alkali flats of the Great Basin are where the famous Burning Man Festival is held every single year, briefly creating a massive city in the middle of nowhere before vanishing back into the dust. However, beneath the neon lights and industrial wealth, there is an invisible problem that is proving to be an increasingly deadly, existential threat to the entire region: climate change. As the global thermostat rises and the world becomes steadily warmer, more and more of the Great Basin's precious exposed surface water supply is violently evaporated by the intense heat. At the same time, the ancient water supply, being dragged up from the underground aquifers, is strictly finite. Once it is pumped out, it is gone forever. Water scarcity has always been the defining flaw of this region, due to its unique geographic features, and today, that crisis is being rapidly accelerated by shifting global climates. The Great Basin is, and has always been, a land defined by sheer extremes. It has been this way for millions of years. It is a world of extreme temperature, extreme elevation, shocking beauty, and sudden danger. Despite the unique, fascinating natural formation of this mega region, the environmental conditions of the Great Basin are rapidly reaching a tipping point, likely becoming completely unsustainable for human life in the near future. Thank you for watching GeoAtlas. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the deadliest geographic trap in America, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as I post new deep dive geopolitical and geographic videos just like this every single week. If you want to keep exploring the hidden anomalies of our world, click right now to check out our video on the shocking facts about Europe. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next exploration.